Dr. Stephen Nemes presents the best arguments against Catholicism by far. Nobody on the world is close. That's why I just want to react to this and unpack it a little bit because sometimes it's going over y'all heads. I'm looking in the comment section and people are just not understanding at all what he's saying. Everybody is just missing it. So I just want to react to this.
And especially the essential structures of the experience of X.
All right. I think that's really helpful for people.
I skipped to the middle a little bit, so we're getting to the good part. Just watch.
I think they'll see more as we go through, specifically applying this to theology. I think it might be helpful here to turn to a syllogism, or I guess a series of premises that you give in Against Infallibility in Theology, which is an article that you've written. And it follows as such. One should only speak about things with as much confidence as one's access to the facts permit. But our access to the things of theology, as to all things in the world, is only ever fallible and subject to revision. Therefore, we should renounce the pretense of infallibility in theology.
So you got to realize he just proved why nobody can justifiably, as a person, you or me or the Pope or anyone, can think, or atheists, why they could possibly think they have infallible knowledge of the truth. This is why a Pope claiming that he could ever speak infallibly, he could never know this just from a purely philosophical human standpoint. It's just a myth. He thinks that. He might be tricking himself, but he doesn't know that. It is not knowable. And then Dr. Stephen Nemes further goes to prove that these unknowable things are guaranteed to be false. So he said we must renounce the pretense to infallibility. So this is big. I don't know if y'all are understanding this, if I'm saying it clear enough, but this is a big deal.
Now, when I say that, when we kind of talk about taking infallibility out of theology, I think that's going to sound pretty surprising to some people, at least, specifically to my Roman Catholic viewers, and probably to my Eastern Orthodox viewers, and maybe to everyone. We'll see how it goes over. But the reason I want to pull this up now is that actually I think the kind of methodological preference for phenomenology, that might not be the right way of putting it, but phenomenology certainly underpins that. And this might be a way of illustrating that. So what is it about phenomenology that's going to change how we do theology?
Phenomenology is just a philosophy that starts with experience rather than speculation and theories. That's all that means.
That we might consider something like infallibility maybe not a helpful category anymore.
Sure. Well, so if you accept the premise, the phenomenological premise, that our knowledge of a thing has to proceed as far as is possible from the self-disclosure of that thing in experience.
Because knowledge is seeing that. Truth, as Aristotle said, is thinking about a thing, or saying about what is that it is, and saying about what is not that it is not. So knowledge is thinking or saying about what is that it is, consciously being aware of the truthfulness of a proposition. So if you can't see both the proposition and the object in order to verify, then you don't know it. So a pope saying he is infallible in matters of faith and morals, he doesn't see that infallibility. There's no correlation there. He's just making things up.
If you pay close attention to actually what happens when we experience things, you're going to see that our knowledge of things is going to be fallible. There's always going to be the possibility that the conclusions that we come to now will be undermined in the future. And let me give two reasons for why that is. In that paper, I essentially give one reason, but I can give two here now. The first reason is this. In any experience that we have, anytime we are presented with an object, we have to make an interpretive choice between saying this thing is an X or this thing presently resembles but is not in fact an X. And I will give an example. Suppose I see someone in a crowd and it looks like my friend JT, okay?
For one example, imagine the Pope really thought he was infallible, right? He's just a man like us. He's just going through his life. Imagine you're the Pope and you think you're infallible, and then you read all these documents, and then when you're 60 one day, you read this one document and you're like, whoa, this actually guy says I'm not infallible. You can think that might happen, but you can't know that won't happen. So even if you think truly, I mean, if he truly thinks that he's infallible right now, he doesn't know it for sure. It's not something that's knowable. Things that are knowable are things that are directly experienced. For example, I know I'm talking to you right now. That's something infallibly known. By the definition of talking, this is what I'm doing right now. Or 2 + 2 = 4. These things are infallibly known by definition. The Pope being infallible is just a fantasy. It's a joke. It's crazy that people believe it. And he's explaining it so clearly why it has a complete disconnect from reality. And people in the comments still don't see it. That's why I have to make this video, because I don't understand what people are missing.
In that moment, I can choose between saying that is JT or that person only presently resembles but is not in fact JT. Okay. Suppose I go for the interpretation that it is JT. Now the crowd sort of dissipates and I can see the person more clearly, and then I come to the conclusion, oh, this is not JT because of how I see the person then. Right. So my earlier interpretation of my experience of him was undermined by my present one. Okay, so the way that he appeared to me then allowed the interpretation that it's JT. The way that he appears to me now seems to not allow that it's JT. Now it seems.
This is exactly what Catholics go through on a daily basis when they hear something that makes them think, dang, the Catholic Church might not be infallible, and then some other Catholic tweets about it and says some better explanation. They just go wishy-washy back and forth between assurance and not assurance based on what they hear that day. It's not based on any knowledge of truth. It's just stupid. Sorry. Crazy.
Seems to only allow the interpretation that it isn't him. So anytime we experience anything whatsoever, we're put in the position of choosing between one of two possible interpretations.
But this is why you're saved by faith alone, because it's not about having infallible knowledge of something. It's about a disposition of faith and trust towards Christ, because we're not perfect. We don't have the best study habits. We don't have perfect sinless nature. It's just obvious. We're saved by faith alone.
This thing is an X, or this thing only resembles, but is not in fact an X. And even if we make one or the other interpretation, future experiences can undermine that. Now notice there's also this possibility, even in that second experience, right? I'm inclined to say this is no longer JT, but in fact, it could actually be JT. It's just now it doesn't look like him. Maybe something about him has changed. Maybe he looks different now because something has happened in the meantime. So there are all these factors, right? In any one experience, we are not given the whole story of reality.
I basically already said all this. That's why I'm going to fast forward.
Any one experience get complete is. But for the vast majority of people throughout history, this would not have been obvious. This would have been actually very
this is a good example. Listen to this part.
Copernicus, and they prove that if you go outside, the Earth seems to be standing still, whereas the sun moves around the sky. So it looks like the sun revolves around the Earth. Now later come Galileo and Copernicus, and they prove that in fact the Earth revolves around the sun. And for us, this is obvious. But for the vast majority of people throughout history, this would not have been obvious. This would have been actually very counterintuitive. So it's possible that very many people, one appearance seems to support an interpretation, and then later experiences will disconfirm that prior interpretation.
That's why just because something looks like the case and you think that you're sure, if you don't see both the proposition and the thing itself clearly infallibly, then you don't have infallible knowledge. You can't claim that you know. People thought the world had a sun revolving around it, and it's not the case. This is a perfect example.
And the later opinion becomes obvious for subsequent generations, even though it would have been unthinkable for previous generations. So these sorts of things happen all the time in history. Everybody can be wrong about something, and all it takes is one person to come along and to be able to.
This is exactly what's happening in today's day and age about materialism. Materialism thinks a world exists independently of consciousness, but they don't realize you can't even conceive of that. To conceive of it is a world being observed by consciousness. You can't conceive of it. It's just not possible. David Chalmers proved it. Bernardo Castro proved it. And Stephen Nemes proves it philosophically. It's proven scientifically. And this is still a popular belief. This is why this is crazy. This is not more widely known. You got to understand this.
To see things clearly and to explain it to everyone, and then suddenly a new opinion gets taken for granted. So one reason why we should renounce the pretense to infallibility is the fact that we never have the complete.
Well, scientists don't really claim infallibility, so that's not. It's more just normal science people, kids on the street that think science has all the answers. But Catholics as a system actually do claim infallibility, which is just easily disproven.
Complete picture of things. All we have are a sum of experiences, a sum of appearances that we interpret one way, but that could easily be interpreted in the opposite way. We take all of our experiences together and we say, okay, reality is so and so. But we could also just as well say, no, reality is not so and so. It just has looked this way until now, and possibly future experiences will disconfirm that. That's one reason. The second reason why we should renounce.
But before you get all nervous about not knowing, the best part about this is that by cutting out so much nonsense, you're able to see more clearly and just experience what is and move through it with knowledge without being deceived by distractions. So it actually makes life way easier. And you can trust Christ and be saved anyways. So you don't have to have infallible knowledge to have clarity. Thinking that you need infallible knowledge is the root of not clarity.
The pretense to infallibility is because when we experience things, we are also simultaneously experiencing ourselves. And I'll give you this example.
If you think you can have infallible knowledge of what's in the world, you are just believing a lie. So you're forced to not think clearly because you're just not thinking truthfully. Truth is more clear than lies.
Right now, as I look around my room, I have a fish tank over there in that corner of the room. You can't see it, but I can. Now, that fish tank appears to be, cubic. There's a fish inside of it. The water is flowing. The light is turned on. All those are qualities that belong to the fish tank. Okay, as far as those qualities are concerned, that's the fish tank that I'm seeing. But notice, the fish tank also looks blurry to me. Why does it look blurry to me? Not because the fish tank is blurry, but because I don't have glasses on. My eyesight is bad, right? So I am not only seeing the fish tank, I'm also simultaneously experiencing myself. And it's my sense of sight that allows me to see the fish tank.
This is exactly what the Pope is doing when he reads Matthew 16 in the Bible and he thinks that it's calling him infallible. He might think that, but it's because his mind is blurry, just like him looking at the fish tank. He actually is confused enough to think that actually might. But once he gets more clarity, he'll see infallibility is a myth.
Tank in the way that I do. If I had, for example, if I were colorblind, the items in the fish tank would look different. If I couldn't see color at all, it would look different to me. If I had the sense of if I had the eyesight of another kind of animal, say of a hawk or a cat or a dog, then again, the fish tank would look very differently to me. If I could see UV rays.
And if I'm wrong, I admit that I could be. I'm just sharing what it appears to me right now, clearly. And I'm trying my hardest to beg someone with a different point of view to help me see their point of view, because to me it's obvious. Atheism and Catholicism are impossible.
Or if I could see heat, like the predator or whatever, the fish tank would look differently to me than it does now. So I don't only just experience the fish tank, I'm also experiencing myself, particularly my powers of perception, which make me capable of encountering the fish tank. Furthermore, there's also the fact that I experience things as my way of thinking allows me to do so. So for example, right now I am talking to you by means of this computer, and there's nothing unfamiliar to me about this. This is totally normal. But if you were to take my great-grandmother from Romania who died, before any of this stuff were invented, and if she were to come here, she would not understand what's happening. She would just see a bunch of stuff here, and it would take a long time for, at least in part and always, a result of the way we are, and not only of the way things are.
Exactly.
We don't just experience the world directly. We experience the world
simultaneously. The real Catholicism.
On the sun. We were wrong about that. I think everyone wants to recognize, okay, yeah, like there are some hold, right? So I can hold X position, and everything is on an equal that, say, I don't know, let's say Jesus.
In the Western philosophical tradition for a long time, that basically all people read from him is Words of Christ. It was the last book that he ever published.
How this would probably circle back to you finding these kind of epistemic problems with Roman Catholicism. I imagine this is at the core of it, but I don't want to put that into your own words. So if we kind of bring this full circle here, you were interested in Roman Catholicism, you almost became Catholic, but then you didn't, in part because of phenomenology. Is that was the kind of the linchpin of that, this idea of infallibility? Is that how phenomenology kind of undermined the Roman Catholic theological system for you? Or is there other things that phenomenology hits on that began to unravel that system for you?
So not long ago, I would have said that the issue of infallibility is the principal problem, the pretense to infallibility. Once you get rid of that, you basically do away with Roman Catholic theology, because of course Roman Catholic theology takes for granted that the Church can claim to speak infallibly, and that it can take its pronouncements to be true, and to take them for granted is true, just as a matter of definition. But Actually, I would say that the problem is even more basic than that. And now, as I think back and as I try to understand my intellectual journey to get to this point, I think that this was a problem from the beginning, but it has taken me a little while, and I've been kind of shedding light on this
He's
problem
saying this
in
because
bits and
at
pieces.
first he
Now, as I
noticed
think
the
back,
infallibility of
this
the
was
issue, but
one
then he
thing that
realized
was
it's a full
pretty clear,
logic of the
and
inaccessible.
also
And this
I will go so
extends
far as to
to
say that
more,
the
much
problem that
more
I'm about to
things,
mention will
even
apply to Eastern Orthodox
materialism,
theology and even to certain
representationalism,
more traditional statements of Protestant theology. So
even,
really, my
yeah,
complaint
a
is
lot
with
of
the
traditional
Catholic, much more
Protestants, even
lowercase c Catholic theological tradition in general, as it evolved
Orthodoxy,
in history,
Islam.
rather than with Roman Catholicism in particular. And I will try to explain what this is the problem.
You guys got to understand, this guy is disproving belief systems that billions of people hold clearly and undeniably, and nobody's watching this. It's just crazy to me. People have to hear this. If they don't have answer to this, they shouldn't be spreading false truth. Crazy. Listen to this.
I will begin by an analogy with a certain argument that is made in phenomenological philosophy against the conception of consciousness called representationalism. Okay, representationalism says that our experience, our consciousness, is not an experience of real things directly. Representationalism says that what we experience are, strictly speaking, representations or images that are produced by our body as a result of its physical interaction with the environment, just like a movie being projected. So the sphere of consciousness is basically the sphere of representations that are produced by our body. Now, the way things appear, the appearance, this domain of appearance need not correlate with reality. Okay, the things that appear to me need not be real.
This is what evolutionists say when they say, "Oh, we just evolved and we develop these senses that may or may not actually be real. They're just for survival. It might not actually be correlated with truth. It might just be for survival. So what you're looking at me, I might not even be real. I might be a freaking dinosaur, but I'm looking like this because if you imagine me like this, then I'll be more helpful to you." Like, it's just a fantasy dream that has no basis of reality. Nobody's experienced this. It's a myth. And that's why we can discard it.
And furthermore, the things that are real need not appear to me.
Sorry, I ruined it. He's going to explain it better, but just follow the flow of things. He's just explaining representationalism right now.
So my experience, this is like Descartes' problem of the evil demon, right? Could it be that all my conscious experience is illusory? Maybe none of this is real. Consider also the brain in a vat, thought experiment from philosophy. How do we know we're not in the matrix? How do we know we're not brains in a vat? And we have this rich world of experience, but none of it corresponds to anything real. Okay. Representationalism distinguishes between the world of experience and reality in that way. It says that they are two separate spheres. The world of experience is one sphere, and experience, strictly speaking, is representational. Now, these representations may or may not correspond to anything real. Okay, there may be real things that do not show up in our representational consciousness, and there may be things in our representational consciousness that do not correspond to anything real. So the two spheres, appearance and reality, are separate and independent of one another. Now, the argument that phenomenologists bring against this view is that if that's true, we land in skepticism, right? We can never know if any of our representations are adequate. Now, why not? Because it's impossible to escape the sphere of representation in order to compare our representations with the real things themselves. It's impossible for me to compare my experiences with reality if all my experiences are representations. I mean, even that comparison would have to take place in an experience. And by definition, all experiences are representational, but do not necessarily correlate to reality.
So if you even believe that paradigm, you are forced to admit that nothing correlates one-to-one between reality and what you're seeing. So any of your visions or beliefs or anything you think falls into question at this point. That's where he's going with this. And that's a self-refuting theory, because if everything has no meaning, then even that statement has no meaning. It's just a self-refuting belief system.
Representationalism distinguishes between consciousness or experience and the world of experience and reality in such a way that it's impossible to escape the sphere of consciousness in order to see whether or not our representations are adequate to the realities. I could never know whether my experience of things corresponds to the real world because I can't step outside of myself to experience things, to see the comparison, right? I'm always ever experiencing things as they appear to me, right? All I ever have are representations. So because all I ever have are representations, and I can't step outside of the representation in order to compare it to the reality, I can't know if anything that I experience is real. Now, the representationalists have a response to this argument. They admit that the sphere of appearance and the sphere of being are separate, right? They're fundamentally independent spheres. What appears need not be real, and what is real need not appear.
He's gonna just say, I've seen this so many times. He's gonna talk about how they posit that, oh, you can have signals between the sphere of being and that. Yeah.
Right? So even though I cannot step outside of myself in order to compare my representational consciousness with reality, nevertheless, there occurs within my representational consciousness certain feelings of certainty or feelings of clarity or of evidence that signal to me that my representational consciousness is matching with reality. So they try to overcome, the representationalist tries to overcome this independence.
But the problem is, if there's a correlation, then there's not different spheres. It's definitional. It's just wrong.
Correlation of the accessible sphere of representation,
logically incoherent.
Reality is signaled by these feelings of certainty.
These two independent spheres depend on each other.
Anything, and so they're useless as criteria of truth. And I can give an example, right? Anytime you change your opinion on some matter of metaphysics or some matter of ethics or some matter of history, okay, you can go from being perfectly convinced of something to being perfectly convinced against it. But opinions, the realities of those spheres don't change. It's not like the truths of metaphysics changed, right? They are what they are. It's not like the truths of history changed, right? Suppose you were convinced that something happened in history and then you came to be convinced that it didn't happen. It's not as if the truth of history changed. The truth of history was what it was. It's just that you came to feel convinced about one opinion and then later you came to feel convinced about another opinion.
This is why he's showing that these signals that they posit are not indicators of truth. People can have this so-called signal that they posit about all type of things, like the world revolving, or the sun revolving around the world. There are all type of wrong things.
But notice, it's the same feeling, it's the same conviction. You felt just as certain the first time as you did the second time. But the truth cannot have changed. So this shows that the
Pope could feel just as certain as infallible as 10 years later once he realizes he's not. It's not knowable. You feel pain if you pinch yourself or someone punches you. That is infallible knowledge. You know that you didn't create yourself, so God exists. That's infallible knowledge. But these other mythical claims are not.
The signal that you are proposing as an indicator of the correlation of the two spheres is unstable, right? You have that signal when the correlation is not there, and you might not have the signal even when the correlation is there. So you can be right about something but not feel sure. You could have the truth, and yet because you don't feel sure, there would be a correlation between the spheres of representation and the spheres of being that does not have a signal. It's not signaled by anything. So basically what I argue, and I've argued this in my volume Orthodoxy and Heresy, and I'm also arguing this in a new book that I'm writing called Theology of the Manifest. This is like my next big project. Basically, I'm arguing that representationalism follows what I call a logic of the inaccessible, right? You have two spheres. You have an accessible sphere and an inaccessible sphere. They're independent. They don't need to correlate with each other, but you want something that's in the inaccessible sphere. So you have to posit a signal in the sphere of the accessible that indicates to you when the inaccessible thing is there for you. This is the logic of the inaccessible. You distinguish between two spheres. You say that they're uncorrelated and independent, but you posit a signal within one sphere to let you know when you're in the possession of something in the other sphere. Now, the logic of the inaccessible is unstable.
The reason he's speaking about it like this is because it transfers to so many different areas, not just Catholicism or even atheism. It's just too many. I don't even want to go into it, but just think about it. You'll notice there's more and more.
Precisely because these two spheres are independent of one another, the signal can appear without there being any correlated reality, and the reality can appear without there being any correlated signal, right? So the only way that you could get the signal to be reliable is if there was a law, right? The inaccessible reality and the signal.
If there's a law, then there's a correlation. They're not independent spheres.
Their correlation. But if there's a law that can be given that describes their behavior, then they belong to the same sphere. They're not separate spheres anymore. The two spheres would not be independent of each other, but they would actually be correlated. So this is and then that goes against the presumed distinction of the spheres. So basically, the argument is that representationalism follows a logic of the inaccessible, and the problem with the logic of the inaccessible is this instability of the signal. If I posit a signal with a human being is naturally capable of investigating, everything that a human being is naturally capable of knowing, that belongs to the sphere of philosophy. Why is sacred doctrine necessary? In addition, in Thomas Aquinas, at the very beginning of his Summa Theologiae, he asked the question, is sacred doctrine necessary? Why can't philosophy do it all? Okay, philosophy for him basically just refers to all those sciences and fields of inquiry that are possible for human beings given their natural endowments. Okay, so everything that a human being is naturally capable of investigating, everything that a human being is naturally capable of knowing, that belongs to the sphere of philosophy. Why is sacred doctrine necessary in addition to philosophy? Can't philosophy just do it all? He basically says that there are things that belong to our salvation that have to be revealed to us by God, which are philosophically inaccessible. You cannot get at them by means of natural reason. And these things are things on which our salvation depends. So notice he's distinguishing between the sphere of the salvation and the sphere of philosophy. And there are things in the sphere of salvation which are inaccessible from the sphere of philosophy.
But that's super wrong because Jesus' death and resurrection is just a historical event. It's accessible to natural philosophy. You don't need divine revelation for that.
The sphere of philosophy is where we start. Therefore, these things that are necessary for us but are inaccessible to us have to be given to us. The sphere of the sacred the sphere of salvation has to somehow come down to us. But if the two spheres are different, then when the sphere of salvation comes down to us, it's going to have to be manifest in some way by means of the things that belong to our sphere. And so, then in Roman Catholic theology, you have the idea of the motives of credibility. Maybe you've heard this, people talking about this. Why should you believe that what the Roman Catholic Church teaches is true, even though it cannot prove to you without a shadow of a doubt that what it teaches is true? Well, because all of these miracles and all these things that happen in the Roman Catholic Church are signals that what it teaches is true, even though they are strictly unrelated, right? So a miracle can happen, and that doesn't mean that what you say is true. But the motives of credibility are proposed as signals of the truth of Catholic teaching, even though strictly speaking, they're logically unrelated. So here we see the logic of the inaccessible at work. You have this sphere of sacred doctrine, which is philosophically inaccessible. It's revealed. It's not something that people have natural access to. It comes down to us from above, supposedly. But you know where to find it because of these motives of credibility. Now, the obvious counter argument is that there's going to be no connection between those two. There are miracles in other religions. There are holy people.
I hope this is not going over your head because it's nothing more for me to comment on. He's saying it too clearly.
In other religions. Why should we believe that the Roman Catholic Church's teaching is true rather than the miraculous teachers of other religions? So anytime you posit these signals from...
Or why should we believe materialism is true rather than some New Age claim that everything is conscious, or panpsychism? Like, these people make claims with no possible knowability. It's just crazy.
Within one sphere that are supposed to indicate to you the presence of something from another sphere, they're going to fall apart. There's going to be a logical invalidity there. There's going to be a non sequitur. Think also of what Vincent of Laurent says.
Just when you understand this, it brings so much clarity and conviction in your belief, because you can know that you only believe that which is verified and experientially true, and you don't put more confidence into your worldly convictions than is justified because you know that they're fallible. You don't have a false sense of infallibility. It's so wonderful.
In his Vincentian canon, right? How do you distinguish the Catholic truth?
I mean, you pretty much get the point. I mean, you can go watch the video if you want. It's on Gospel Simplicity. He has a really good channel. You get the point. I mean, there's a lot more videos about this. Dr. Stephen Nemes has more on it.
But that's been a lot.
I'll go more through on it, but I think that's good for now. You get the point. Avoid the logic of the inaccessible, or logic of the accessible, unaccessible. Avoid unknowable claims and just trust God. Trust Christ. Faith alone saves. Like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.